little bit here. All right. Hi, folks. Thanks for taking your time out, your evening tonight to listen about DEQ's proposed cleanup plans for the Willamette Cove upland. I'm Erin McDonald with the DEQ cleanup program. I've been on the project about 2 years, and about last summer, as the engineer support, and last summer I transitioned into the project manager role for this project. So a lot of great work was done before I was on the project, but this is a fun phase right now. So hopefully some takeaways from tonight is that DEQ has prepared a proposed cleanup plan for the upland portion of the site. This action is separate from the in-water work that's being done under EPA's Portland Harbor Superfund, and we're currently accepting comments on the proposed plan. Right now it's through the end of June, and at the end we'll talk about how comments can be submitted in multiple ways. Topics today are going to be, what is the cleanup program? Why are we doing a cleanup? We'll expand on a little bit more of the DEQ versus the EPA responsibilities, the current status of the upland work. We'll go into pretty much a summary of the proposed cleanup plan, how to comment, and then what's next, what happens after the public comment period. So the Willamette Cove has a rich history. Industrial activities have spanned pretty much over the 100 years. What you see here is a picture of kind of a peak industrial age in 1934. They were originally 3 different properties. We call them the west parcel, the central parcel, and the east parcel. One was a plywood mill. The central parcel was dry dock activities, and the upland supported that. And then the east parcel was a copperage, which was like a wood rail manufacturing facility. And just a little bit about where the site is on the Willamette River. It's on the northeast bank of the Willamette River. It's within the Portland Harbor. It spans about 3,000 feet of shoreline, and then you can see that it's not too wide. It ranges from about 70 feet to 100 feet, depending where you are. And the Willamette Cove today, it looks a lot different. As I was saying, the industrial activities all had pretty much died down by the 1970s. The majority, all the buildings were removed, but there is some remnant structures like concrete pads and other infrastructure that is on site. It's kind of scattered throughout the site. Mainly you can see the concrete pad on the east parcel, but if you did start looking, there is quite a bit of other infrastructure there. And you can see that the vegetation has reemerged, and we have some, pretty healthy trees. It looks pretty nice. It's looking a lot closer to Park Lake. Also, before I move that, sorry, I also wanted to mention that Metro purchased the property in, trying to recall, the 90s, and they purchased old parcels, and now we call it the Willamette Cove site, and they have plans for a park with a regional trail. So the reason we're talking about this today, because there is a problem at the Willamette Cove site. There's extensive contamination in the upland, the riverbank, and in water. And these are, not only is it contaminated, it's contaminated with contaminants that have very high toxicity, and they're spread throughout the site. So we're talking about dioxins, metals, PCBs, but there's also other contaminants. And again, I guess I already went into this, but it is on the Willamette River, and which leads to the next slide. So it's in the heart of the Portland Harbor, which is a Superfund. That Superfund work is overseen by EPA. This is their work is the in-water and the riverbank cleanup, and which sometimes gets confused with DEQ's responsibility. But in this case, and throughout the Portland Harbor, we're responsible for the upland cleanups when there is contamination that needs to be addressed. And the next slide kind of, oh, sorry, I forgot there was an animation there. But we had Portland Harbor, the Superfund shows the in-water, and then you can see the Willamette Cove there. That's very nice. The next figure also illustrates that the Superfund is the riverbank and the in-water, and when we talk about uplands, we're talking about top of bank and landward. So a lot of work has been done to date. Metro, the current property owner, and the Port of Portland, the former property owner of the central parcel, joined into a voluntary agreement with DEQ in 2000. There's been multiple phases of remedial investigation to better define the nature and extent of contamination. This information was used to do risk assessments. Humans and plants and animals use the site, and so a risk assessment is based on those uses and their presence. And also what we know about plans for future uses of the site. The site information was also used to do hotspots, to remove hotspots. A significant one was done in 2015 and 2016 period. While we removed some hotspots, there is contamination that still remains on the site, and that is what the proposed cleanup plan addresses. And that's kind of one thing I think there is sometimes some confusion that, there were these removal actions, and while we did reduce hotspots, we do have, there is contamination across the whole entire site that poses risk to humans and plants and animals. And these hotspot areas, hotspot areas are also present, and these hotspot areas present a very high risk. You can see in the figure at the top, there's a very small hotspot area that's left, and that's what we understand about the site that remains, poses a risk to humans. Now, I'd like to point out that the risk-based screening levels for humans and ecology can be quite different because we are different species, and for many of reasons, the ecology ones tend to be quite lower, and so there is contamination that may not be a hotspot for humans, but may be a hotspot for ecology. And when we're talking about dioxins, that is present throughout the site. Now, there's other contaminants where we still have hotspots. Sometimes we talk about dioxin hotspots and non-dioxin hotspots, and there is some other areas that are hotspots for other contaminants. So who's being exposed at the site? We talked about the plants and animals present, but the other people we consider, we just don't consider all people the same. We do know people use the site. I mean, it's a beautiful site. There's signage up there, but that doesn't necessarily keep people out. So we're talking about recreational users, we're talking about campers, and then we also think about future users, and so the site plans to be a park. So again, we're thinking about recreational users, the walkers, the cyclists, the bird watchers, campers, and then future construction workers. Okay. And when we talk about risk assessment, is quite complicated. We could spend hours talking about it, but risk is pretty much the toxicity of the contamination, and humans or plants and animals being exposed to it. So if you either remove the toxicity or the exposure, then you remove the risk. So in this case, the entire uplands of the Willamette Cove has soil contamination. So what we call so there's unacceptable risk. And then some of these, again, hotspot areas present a very high risk. And because these conditions are present, there is a cleanup is necessary to protect human health and the environment. So how do we get to a cleanup plan? I was talking about we've done remedial investigations, we've done removal actions, we've done risk assessments, and defining, and so we've defined kind of the nature, extent, contamination that remains at the site. So the Port and Metro were asked to propose some remedial options. We start with a very broad range, and they deduce that into a feasibility study, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And these remedial technologies are traditional and non-traditional. Just a moment. So when we talk about traditional methods, this is kind of like your dig and haul excavation and removal options, and you take it off site. Other traditional kind of construction-based methods are capping. And capping can be just flat out capping the whole site, or you can consolidate it and put a cap over it. Other options that we're looking into were chemical treatment, bioremediation, thermal remediation. You know, all the latest technologies that had merit were looked at during the feasibility study stages. And I'd like to point out there was 2 feasibility studies. There was one produced in 2017 based on DEQ comments and EPA comments and tribal representative comments. It was revised, and the final feasibility study was completed in April 2019. So the contaminants at the site, when you're looking at the remedial technologies to consider, you also have to look at what the site conditions are. And in this case, there was multiple contaminants, kind of what we call persistent contaminants, such as dioxins, metals, and PCBs across the whole entire site. And they're persistent, we call them persistent because they are really hard to treat. So there's not a lot of treatment methods out there. And these persistent contaminants also tend to be very, have a higher toxicity. So the cleanup standards tend to be low, notably for dioxins. So that's why you see these kind of maps with dioxins exceeding across the whole entire site. And the other challenges and considerations are when you're choosing a method is, you know, not just, you know, will the method work? It's also how will it impact the community? So if you're talking about truckloads leaving a site, like thousands of truckloads, sorry, my AirPlug just came out, one moment. So, you know, that has its own impact, not just to the immediate community, but the larger community and where those trucks are going. So once you have your broad range of technologies to consider, there's also the regulatory side. And the number one criteria that we require, it's a pass and fail, is will it be protected? Will it meet your remedial goals? Will it be protected for human health and the environment? So when we talk about that it's hard to treat these persistent contaminants with bioremediation and some of the chemical treatment and site-wide, you know, there's those challenges, and all those did not pass the pass-fail criteria, at least current technology that's out there. Once you get it past that gate, we have in our regulatory framework what we call the balancing factors, and these are what we're showing here on the figure. It's will it be effective? Can we implement it? Are it easily implementable, or is it hard to implement? Is there a risk to that, whether it's to the environment or workers? Is it reliable long term? Maybe it works for 1 week, but we want something that works for years. And then cost does come on into this. So we call them the 5 balancing factors. and that's how DEQ makes its decision. And what we do is take the remedial alternatives that were carried forward, we compare them to each other, and then essentially they get ranked against each other. So in this case, a hybrid approach that the Port and Metro proposed outranked the other alternatives, and it is a hybrid approach, and it will protect future recreational park users, construction workers, campers, and plants and animals. And this hybrid approach is, I also call it like a tiered approach, because first of all, we're going to remove hotspots that remain for human health. And there's an asterisk there, which I'll explain later, but it's not just human health. There will also be eco hotspots that go off-site. Now, once we remove the hotspots, there's going to be a good portion of the site will remain that still contains contamination that's either or both above human health risk and eco risk. So everything that's above human health risk would be consolidated to one area we're calling the consolidation area. That will also include eco risk as well, particularly eco hotspots that weren't already taken off-site. And then what would remain after you consolidate that area, and you would cap it with an engineered cap, you have these areas that kind of have a lower level risk to ecology, or if any risk that remains, and that would be a topsoil cover. And since contamination remains on site, there would be long-term monitoring and maintenance. So this is kind of the cleanup concept and illustration. We see the areas that are going to be removed. You can see that it's bigger than a little circle for human health because this also includes the ecological non-dioxin hotspots. And then you see a consolidation area, and then the other colors kind of representing the rest of the site would be covered. And the other part of this plan is that we would try to preserve the native trees to the extent possible while achieving the protectiveness that we need.
Sorry.
So when we talk about hotspot removals, again, we're talking about that human health hotspots, and then we're also talking, like I just said, about the ecological non-dioxin furan hotspots. And these are metals. Mercury is one of the metals. It's very toxic to ecological life. And I guess what's not really said here also is if we find additional human health hotspots, there's going to be pre-remedial design sampling. I'll go into that later. But if we do find additional contamination, it will still follow this plan. If it exceeds human health hotspots, it'll go off-site. That's the #1 priority. So this is kind of tier 1. This is what happens first. So rest of the site would still have contamination. Pretty much rest of the site would be excavated, and the depth will vary depending on the contamination, the areas, and the contamination there. And it would be consolidated to one area. One benefit about that is you don't leave contamination spread throughout the site. So you're kind of digging it up and putting it in one area. And this will include rest of the human health risk and a majority of the ecological risk. And this is going to be a heavily engineered cap. Right now we're calling for a minimum 3 feet thickness. It would need to be reinforced, so probably some type of rock. And then soil could be used at the top to promote plant growth. It will need to be tailored to fit into park features, or it needs to look like a park to the extent possible. And at the same time, park features could be used as kind of covered areas. So you could maybe, this is all hypothetical, but you could use maybe the consolidation area and build a viewing platform. That's not up to DEQ, but if that fits into Metro's plans, that's something that can be done. And I think importantly, what people do have concerns about is the long-term resiliency. We are leaving not hotspots on site, but human health hotspots, but what we are leaving on site does pose some human health risk. But it'll be this 3-foot minimum barrier. It'll be designed to withstand not just current storms, but expected increased storms with intensity, increased floods, seismic considerations. And so following all of those activities, we have kind of the final tier. So we'll be doing a soil cover in those areas. At minimum, there'll be 1-foot topsoil placed across the site just for plant growth. Now, if there's other areas that have ecological risks, the thickness would be based on the risk left for plants and animals. And here I try to create an animation. We'll see how this goes to kind of show this concept. So here we have the removal areas that go off-site, and they fade away. Then we start excavating and creating a consolidated area. And as we continue to excavate the consolidation area, it'll grow. Here we have it growing. And so with that, the consolidation area will have size limits too. It's not just about having consolidation area and we'll put everything that's left on site will go in this consolidation area. There will be size constraints. And I'll talk more about the consolidation area location and shape in the next slide. And then once that's done, we're going to want to make it look like a park. We can make it green. It's just whatever fits into Metro's park plans. Add more vegetation. So make it look like a really nice place that you want to, people want to be. So in the next slide, I'm trying to illustrate that, right now it's on a figure, it's just shown as a rectangle. Well, the consolidation area is not going to be a rectangle. It's not going to be a pyramid. It could be many shapes and sizes. So, I mean, it could be a circle. It could be long and skinny, maybe shaped into certain areas of the site. And then also, it doesn't have to be on the east parcel. I mean, that's still to be determined in remedial design. So after D2 selects a remedy, we'd go into remedial design. And an important component of this remedy is that there will be remedial design sampling, and it'll be site-wide, it'll be comprehensive. We've done a lot of sampling in the past, but we've done removal actions, but it's kind of been done in series of different methods. So we'll kind of do it all in similar methods, and why we do this is also to better refine the areas, provide better resolution of the extent of contamination and the volumes. And we want to know the volumes because we want to know how much we're taking off-site. We need to design a consolidation area. You need to know all of that information up front to the extent that you can. And this data that you will get from remedial design sampling will help engineers design the consolidation area. And that's when the location and the shape will be decided. There'll be other considerations we'll also have to take into account is one, size constraints. DEQ is going to place limits on the size of it. There's going to be a riverbank cleanup, and we don't know exactly what that looks like, but we are expecting that the riverbank will be potentially set back in areas. There's definitely steepened areas that have contamination, and there'll be a cleanup. So we're going to have to fit into that cleanup as well. And then the consolidation area will be designed to fit in the park infrastructure, and again, for long-term resiliency, for storms, flood, seismic events. And then there will also be a geotechnical analysis. We have lots of features around the site. We have railroad tracks. We have a riverbank. So all type of that analysis will take place as part of this remedial design. So it's a lot of information, but I just want to highlight some things that we're doing that is essentially restoring the site to be protective. And we're doing an excavation. We're removing the sources, particularly the human health hotspots. And I say more as in ecological hotspots will also be taken off site, particularly the metal hotspots. The remaining risk will be removed for where it is and consolidated, and eco risk will be excavated and consolidated to one portion of the site, or a focus, I don't know, a focused area of the site. And what we have left is, we can't just leave it unkept. So what we're also going to do is create barriers. We're going to put caps and covers down to remove the exposure. And what this does is protect, in the future, any humans that come on site, whether they're daily runners, campers, and folks doing construction work. And don't forget about the plants and animals. So where we are in the cleanup process, Port of Portland and Metro submitted a feasibility study in 2019. You can see that as the first thing in the timeline. DEQ completed a staff report. We took all the information the port provided and just all the information that we have. Luckily, we've worked pretty collaboratively with the Port of Portland over the years and have had multiple meetings and reports, so we were pretty much on the same page when it was time to come up with a cleanup option and propose one. The DEQ produced this staff report that summarizes the cleanup action, but it also is the basis for our cleanup action. So it is the justification why we're proposing what we are. It is maybe 30, 40 pages long, so most people don't want to read through it, but if you do, I can let you know where to find it. So right now, we are in the public comment period. It started in March. Right up front, we've committed to 60 days. Because of the current state of affairs with COVID, we extended that 2020. We definitely want people to remain social distancing. So, this is the time we want to hear from you. This is how we get to understand what the community wants. This is a very important element of the cleanup process. So I'll give you some avenues to provide comments. Feel free to let me know what you like, but also let us know what you're concerned about. And once the closing on the public comment period closes, DEQ reviews the comments, and we definitely consider them. We actually, if it's related to the cleanup, we'll write up a response, and that response will be included in DEQ's what we call the record of decision. We were hoping for this to happen in the summer. We'll see how this goes with social distancing and whatnot. So after we have a record of decision, we start into remedial design. The Port of Portland and Metro will start developing work plans. DEQ will be providing input and eventually approval to go implement those work plans. And like I talked about, a big component of it will be first collecting a good amount of data, and then they'll go into the actual engineering design. And after that, we do what we call remedial action. We'll implement the cleanup. And, it wasn't just DEQ and the Port of Portland and Metro. We've had many partners in this. Oregon Health Authority has helped us with getting talking to the community about contaminants at the site and letting them know that it is harmful. There is current risk at the site. The Portland Harbor Community Coalition has also helped with this, and the CAG, and importantly, really helping us out with the outreach, particularly in the last year. They've put a lot of work into this. So thank you, guys. So more information. If you still want to go get more information after this presentation, there's this link. We'll provide this presentation, but if you want to take a screenshot or jot this down, or we can put it in the download section, there is a DEQ Willamette Cove Upland's website that has fact sheets, executive summaries, it has public notices in 4 different languages, and then it also has a summary, how to comment, it links to where you can comment, and if you scroll down to the bottom, there is DEQ staff report and the feasibility study. There's also more information we also have an environmental cleanup site information database, and we have it for every site, and this site ID is 2066. And then you can contact me directly. I mean, this is my work phone number that's shown and my email address. While we did set up another email address for comments, that doesn't mean you can't send comments to me directly. It was just so my inbox wouldn't get filled up. So right now we're about 2.5 months into public comment. Right now it ends at June 30th. I just talked about kind of the 3 ways to submit comments. You can also mail me, so my mail address is listed on the DEQ website. And then there's these public meetings. Unfortunately, we were planning on doing these more in person. So if you have a comment that you want to submit now, I mean, I would recommend actually just sending it directly to this website. But if you just want to do Q&A, I mean, please insert some questions that we can answer. And I didn't edit this completely because you'll just have to pretend that there's information in the back of the room. But we definitely can get you copies of this presentation. Any questions? Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you, Erin. We do have some questions coming in, and I see hands raised. So what I'm going to do now is read through the questions that have been submitted as Erin was presenting, and then we'll get to folks with their hands raised. So if your hand is raised and someone asks your question that you also had in mind, you can click that same button and put your hand down, or just hang tight, and I promise I will get to you. So our first question is there an estimate for how much soil needs to be removed?
There is. I think right now it's estimated to be about, do you mean removed from off-site or the consolidation area? I have an estimate off my head for the consolidation area, and it's about 23,000 cubic yards. Actually, the soil that we removed off-site, the hotspot areas, is actually a much smaller volume at this point.
Great, thank you very much.
And if you need more exact numbers, just contact me directly. And it's also in the staff report, if you want to look at it.
Perfect.
And I'm also saying that Michael wanted me to talk about, we also are mailing out some postcards, how to comment on the site. These would go to the St. John's neighborhood and Cathedral Park.
Perfect, thanks, Erin. Yeah, that's a good reminder. So the next question is, will the consolidation area be lined?
It would not be lined. There's no liner underneath plan. There would be what we call a demarcation over the top. The contaminants we're talking about consolidating, and at the levels that they are, we're not worried about infiltration and leaching into groundwater. But the top would have a demarcation layer before you even apply the cap.
Okay. The next question is, what types of contaminants will be retained on site at the consolidation area?
Well, we'll pretty much have all the site COCs will remain on site, but they would be at lower levels than only hotspots at this point are proposed going off site. And hotspots are, depending on the contaminant, are orders of magnitude greater than the risk-based level.
Gotcha. All right, thank you. Next question is, why are you proposing consolidation at Willamette Cove when the confinement that was proposed for Terminal 4 had widespread community opposition?
Well, I've talked about this being kind of a protective, and also we have all the balancing factors that come into play. So it's a hybrid approach that would be protective. I actually don't know what happened at Terminal 4, so I'll have to rely on somebody else to answer that question. Maybe Dan has some insight on that one.
I actually don't. I'm not that aware of it, but I will say that, you know, what you said is true, which is this is really a balancing effort here in terms of we want to remove the most highly concentrated contamination off of the site. That'll go to a Subtitle D landfill, and then we want to take the moderately contaminated soil and, you know, and consolidate that on site and cap it. And the reason why we're not taking all of it on site, there are multiple reasons. One is that there's what we call the implementation risk associated with taking literally thousands of cubic yards of contaminated soil off of the property. Another is the carbon footprint associated with, you know, digging all that up and essentially moving it to another location. So this hybrid approach, we feel like, really taps into some of the best concepts for different types of remediation. Take the worst contamination off-site, lesser contamination remain on-site in a protective fashion with a 3-foot cover, and that's kind of the concept behind that. So really there are multiple factors that are considered in crafting this type of remedy.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan.
It looks like we're getting a question about the park. You know, I guess I just use park as a general term, but what we've been told about Metro is the plan is for a nature park, and there was also a bond measure that was passed for a regional trail. So at this time, there's no like children play areas planned, not that type of park. It's more intended to be a natural park and actually enhance the environment for plants and animals and birds.
Great. That's really helpful. Thanks for the clarification. So we have another I think question or observation. It says the South Shore appears to be a build-out when the railroad was built. What was the shoreline before the railroad bridge? This could be a removable portion of the shore by the river.
Yeah, I think when you say in the south portion, I think they're talking about the railroad embankment. Maybe I need more clarification on that. So originally, pretty much the whole entire site used to be wetlands or semi-seasoned wetlands or grasslands up to the bluff. Maybe good portions were actually formerly river areas, or at least seasonally. So pretty much the whole entire site has been filled in at phases to develop those properties. So the southern portion is, if I'm thinking the same area, it's the railroad embankment, and actually what that was created to build the railroad bridge in the early 1900s. So that all that infrastructure is there for that railroad bridge. And you know, there is a riverbank cleanup that will be occurring, and it's now it's tied with the in-water cleanup that's being done by EPA. Under DEQ oversight, there was a lot of sampling that was done on the riverbank, but that has been folded into the in-water Superfund cleanup.
Great, thanks so much. The next question is, would DEQ support full-scale application of bioremediation if the initial tests have favorable results, since there is a bench test for bioremediation in the process currently?
Yeah, I mean, Dan, feel free to pipe in on this one too, but you know, our understanding, you know, this is a bench scale. It hasn't even done it, you know, and then if it's successful, you know, we kind of would have to go to a pilot scale. So there is a kind of a lot of work that would need to be accomplished. But with that said, if there is new emerging technologies that will treat these type of contaminants successfully, then we're open to that. And we kind of, if you really look at the way we've written the proposed cleanup plan, you know, that is an option in the future. But again, it has to have something that has merit. And like I said, there is some highly toxic contaminants at the site that traditionally have just been hard to treat.
Yeah, Aaron, this is Dan again, and you're exactly right in terms of, you know, we're looking at the three main classes of contaminants, which would be dioxins, PCBs, and metals. And the literature, you know, in terms of successful remediation of those compounds with different bioremediation techniques is not very good. We always want to consider alternative methodologies that might be effective. You know, the other thing is that, as you mentioned before, is that we have to achieve really extremely low cleanup levels at the site. For example, for dioxins, it has to be in the part per trillion range, low part per trillion range. So even if some of those technologies are partially effective, they're not going to get us where we need to go. We'll absolutely look at the results of the testing, say for, you know, micro-remediation, and if that can, some of those technologies can be incorporated into the final remedy, terrific. But our primary task is, as you mentioned before, is whatever remedies we select for the site has to be fully protective of public health and the environment. That means it has to achieve cleanup levels across the site for all contaminants and, you know, meet those extremely low cleanup levels that we're applying for both human health and the environment.
Yeah, and, you know, I would even add to that is that, you know, we do bioremediation at many, many sites, and we're always trying to plug in new technologies, especially if we think they're going to be successful. And just unfortunately, so far at the site, we haven't seen that, and it just doesn't appear appropriate at this time at the site.
Great. Thanks so much. I want to pause. I know there was someone with their hand raised. It looks like it got put down. I just want to pause because this was about where I said I would switch over to the phone. So if there's someone, yep. So Doug, I had seen you had your hand raised. If you want to go ahead and ask your question. Doug Larson. All right, we can't quite hear you if you're talking. Just make sure your phone is unmuted.
So, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you now. Perfect.
Okay, now it works. So I attended your first presentation about a month ago at the Cathedral Park meeting. So in the month, I've had some time to think about some of your points. And a couple of things I've come up with. Most of the people that I've been informally canvassing are opposed to leaving toxins on site. Part of the issue is right next door is the cleanup site that was done at McCormick and Baxter. And I think they've just done their 10-year review on that. It might be more than that. But what we see is a fenced-off dead zone that people can't go into on the riverbank. Riverbanks in the middle of a city are a hugely valuable resource. So the concern is that if anything goes wrong with the consolidation, we get another McCormick and Baxter right next door, blocking off another big part of the riverbank. So my question is, when the 8 or so design options were presented at a CAG meeting about a year ago, none of them really considered the option of just removing all the toxins. I know Dan commented that they worry about carbon footprint and truck traffic, but the newest information I've been getting is you intend to bring in a lot of clean soil to cover over a good large portion of the site when everything's been scraped into a big pile. So I was wondering if there's been any cost-benefit analysis done between filling the trucks that empty clean soil onto the site with toxins from the pile. They probably would qualify to just be taken over to Hillsborough. So if you bring a truckload of clean soil in, you can fill the same truck with toxins going out, so the carbon footprint doesn't change. We end up with a clean site. The other consideration is
maybe I should just answer so I won't get too lost in the questions. Can I just answer the first one or two and then we can move to the next one?
Sure.
Well, McCormick and Baxter was done some time ago, but it had a completely different site owner, and actually I think Mr. McCormick still owns that property. So DEQ can't decide how the future use is. I mean, the owner gets to decide that. And if someday if there's a different owner for McCormick and Baxter, then potentially they can do something else with the site. In this case, Metro owns the site, and they have told us for many years it's going to be a nature park with a regional trail. With that said, they're also, once we have a remedy selected, Metro and Portland and the Port of Portland are on the hook to implement that remedy. And while we can't decide what the future use is, we do select a remedy around planned uses. And I think you were talking about complete. Yes, one of the alternatives actually is complete removal, and the volumes would be significant. While we've asked the Port of Portland and Metro to consider barge, that would be our preference. We're still talking about most likely not everything could be barge if that ends up being an option. So we are talking about a lot of trucks, and the volumes actually that would go off-site if you're going to excavate all the soil we're talking about going up to 3 feet of soil across the whole entire site that would have to be removed. So it is a lot of haul. But you are correct. When we're talking about bringing 1 foot of clean soil on the site, I mean, that's still a significant volume as well. So it is a balancing act.
It seems like it would make sense if you're bringing clean soil on site to not return the trucks empty, since they're going to be going back and forth anyway. So maybe you reduce the toxins on site by
I think if I think you try to plan that in to the extent possible. Unfortunately, the source of soil might be different than where the contaminated soil is. I know during the removal action, some of the hotspot soil had to go out to Arlington, I believe. And then you have to make sure you're not cross-contaminating the truck. So if you want to put clean soil in a truck that had dirty soil, you probably have to have a liner that's removed, or it needs to be cleaned between each haul. I mean, these are all things that the engineers try to figure out during remedial design. So there's not one, to limit trips, because the more trips there is, the more expensive it is, but also make sure there's no cross-contamination. We want a clean remedy.
So, yeah, that's a good point. The other point I was going to make is that you've discussed a lot of design and construction costs for building the cap and consolidating the soil. So those are costs that would go into the cost-benefit analysis too. I just wonder if anyone's ever really considered the
Yeah, actually, that's part of the feasibility study. So if you looked at the feasibility study and actually in DEQ staff report, which summarizes that information, there's estimated costs for actually every single alternative and some pretty detailed costs. You know, that's based on, it's an estimate and it's based on the information we know about the site right now. But I'd have to go back, I don't know off memory, but you know, the remedy we're proposing wasn't the cheapest one. It's about $8 million plus, and I think full removal, if we assume that all our assumptions were correct, it's up to 12 or 13 million. So all that has been, you know, at some point calculated.
Hey, Doug, I wanted to make one more point. This is Dan Hafley. Is that you know, I think you raised a really good point about Mack and Back, McCormick and Baxter. You know, that's a fairly unique site in terms of the kind of contamination that was left on that property. Some of it is actually quite mobile, and which really requires these, and in-water contamination that requires, you know, like these cement block kind of structures you see along the shoreline, and even actually in part of the inner cove. And really the contaminants we're seeing at Willamette Cove are profoundly different in terms of these are really non-mobile contaminants that have a strong affinity for organic carbon in soil, and they're really not going to migrate. And that is really one of the major considerations in terms of this calculus of figuring out whether or not we really need to take it all off-site, or we can be protective and meet some of the other balancing factors, leaving it on-site. And so, you know, it's absolutely appropriate for you to bring up McCormick and Baxter, but I would say that they are two very different sites. Willamette Cove is quite unique in terms of the soil contaminants being non-mobile contaminants, almost exclusively non-mobile contaminants.
And Aaron commented earlier that you don't anticipate that leaching in the consolidation site would ever be an issue?
Absolutely not. If it were to be a problem, we wouldn't allow on-site consolidation to occur.
So another question for the consolidation site. It's going to be a natural area if Metro gets their preference. So burrowing animals and things breaking into the cap and monitoring the cap in perpetuity, do those pose risks?
Yeah, so I didn't go into burrowing animals, but the cap would be designed in a way that would prevent burrowing of animals. That was another reason to consolidate to one area and not try to cap the whole entire site. We usually considered animals to burrow down to at least 2 feet. So whether it's rock or some other barrier, that will be in the consolidation area. And it will be designed to withstand not only floods and storms, but, you know, wear and tear from humans and animals that do burrow. And then there will be a maintenance plan with it. You know, the property owner will be on the hook to maintain it in perpetuity.
Yeah, that'll be us. So I'll let somebody ask some questions. You've given me ideas to look into before I write my comments, so thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Doug. We appreciate it. All right. With that, I do see more questions on the Q&A. So we have a question or a request related to the postcard and whether it could be sent 1 to 2 miles around the site or walking distance. And I think this is a good question for Rebecca, if you want to go ahead and respond to that.
Sure. So hi, everybody. Rebecca Wells-Alpers. I'm helping the DEQ team with outreach. And we have a list of 1,990 addresses that were all included in the 2015 mailing that went out when the excavation in 2016 was performed. Since then, we've added well, so the total number of postcards that will be sent out is 1,990. That includes the 2016 mailing, 2015, 2016 mailing, and also 300 additional addresses that were recently queried because a lot of development has happened since 2015, 2016. As far as the radius, the 1 to 2 mile radius, I have a figure of what this footprint looks like for the postcards. I don't know how to get this. I can certainly mail it or email it to folks. Lauren, if you have the ability, I can email it to you. But I don't know what that looks like as far as 1 to 2 mile radius, because it's kind of a linear strip that includes all of the St. John's neighborhood, but I think there's some additional areas that were included in that as well.
Okay,
and
I think that, oh, go ahead.
Right. As far as timing of that postcard, we're working with the print shop with the state of Oregon right now. They obviously have superseded our mailing that has to COVID-19. Our goal is to get that in the mail in the next couple of weeks.
I made that question. Can I talk? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep, we can hear you.
Yes, I really would like to have 1 to 2 miles radius. That would be a lot more people. And I would also like there to be a possibility for a public meeting. I think it's very important to get agreement with the community before you start sending bulldozers in there. It's really going to look pretty awful when you see how much of the land is going to be, how much of the non-native plants that can be removed. I think it would be to your benefit to have more people involved and understand what's happening there. It would be a lot more people.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. So our next question is, why are the carcinogenic risk-based concentration for total PCBs 2 times higher for houseless community than they are for recreational users? And then the exact numbers are cited from DEQ staff report.
So, Aaron, this is Mike Polson. I'm the DEQ toxicologist, so I think I'll answer this to Michael. So, Michael, I think the table you're referring to shows our risk-based concentrations, and so the higher number means that it's actually less risk. So for human health, the people at most risk are the recreational users, and the human health cleanup levels are based on that because that's the most protective. So this is a bit of a detail, and maybe we can talk about it separately at another time. But I think the main point is that we are protecting to potential recreational users in the future, and the ones that are getting on the site now, and those end up being the lowest risk-based concentrations that we will be cleaning up to in the final remediation.
And Mike, if Rebecca, if I could add to that just to provide some context, DEQ develops these risk numbers and these screening numbers based on exposure scenarios. So, right now, houseless campers are living on the site. They're eating. They're on the site longer than someone who would be using the site recreationally, and which is they have more exposure, and so that's why that number is more protective, or it's a more stringent number. And correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, but that just to provide some context to folks to understand where that number comes from and why it's different than someone who's using the site recreationally.
Yeah, and Mike can expand on this, but the recreational user also accounts for 30 years, like something like 30 years of exposure throughout your lifetime passing through that area.
Right. It's for longer term exposure, and I think we're assuming 100 some days a year, but for an extended period of time, which includes child exposure. I think 6 years as a child, and then some additional years, 20-some years as an adult. So that ends up, because of the, particularly for carcinogens, the longer amount of time creates the greater exposure, and that creates the greater risk. So we come up with the lowest risk-based concentration that we're now intending to clean up to.
Yeah, so when we look at the different humans that could be exposed at the site currently in the future, we always take the lowest risk. So who's at risk, who's the lowest threshold, that's what the cleanup is based on. In this case, it ended up being the recreational user. So, and it also ends up being the case that this is protective of a camper scenario.
Great. Thank you so much. The next question is a clarification that access to the river is not a part of the proposed plan. Is that correct?
Yeah, so right now that is that cleanup is underway under EPA oversight. So when you're talking about the riverbank or the end water access to that and that cleanup, that's the EPA Portland Harbor Superfund. Now, while for logistics and other reasons, while we have kind of separated the uplands and the riverbank and end water, at some point we're going to have to marriage those cleanups back together. So these are not completely separate processes, and we are talking to each other, but there's just different teams leading these types of cleanups. And so we are talking to each other, but we also have different responsibilities and leads.
All right, thank you. And the last question I'm seeing right now is about using barges instead of trucks. Hold on one second. A comment on what you're just going over, Erin. It says, please clarify that the trail will not go through or down the site towards the river, just on the outer edge. Is that something we can answer, or should Metro?
It's not up to where, we don't get to decide where trails go. That would be up to the property owner, and so they get to make that decision.
And maybe this is Dan. Maybe Katie could clarify. But what we've been told is that that the bikeway, the trailway, is going to be in the upland portion of the site.
Yeah, Katie, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. This is Katie Weil with Metro Parks and Nature. Thanks. As Dan and Erin just pointed out, currently the regional trail alignment goes along the outer edge of the upland. Currently, there are no planned spur trails for river access, and that's something that everyone will be discussing through master planning down the road. But at this time, the site owner, Metro, has no intention of putting trails down to the river. Does that hopefully answer questions? And I'm happy to answer more.
Thank you, Katie. All right, so the next question was about barges being able to move more than trucks can for the same carbon footprint. And so this individual is guessing that it would take many more, more effort by trucks than by barge. Is that something we can speak to?
Yeah. barge is actually our DEQ's province, and we've asked the Port of Portland and Metro to look into it when it comes to remedial design. Actually, the Willamette Cove site was used for barge transport during actually the McCormick and Baxter cleanup. That was some time ago, so we'd have to see if that's still a possibility. You know, things do change over time. The reason we prefer barge is because it does reduce truck trips, as you said, but there is still, I should point out, there's still implementation risks with both transportation, you know, potential accidents and whatnot. But we definitely would want to reduce truck trips through the neighborhood. And in the McCormick and Baxter, they actually looked into rail, but when they found out all the logistics that went into it, it's not like you can just stop a train. You actually have to have a separate rail line that you could pull over, and there just wasn't the space, and the numbers didn't work out.
Yeah, hi, this is Dwight Liza with the Port of Portland. I wanted to chime in a little bit on this too. Yeah, we are definitely looking at barges versus trucks. There's definitely some significant advantages of hauling the large volumes of soil both in and out of the site on barges versus trucks. And that's part of the driving force of why we wanted to implement this remedial action once the design is determined in concert with the work that we would be doing in water. In-water work is going to require a lot of barges as well, and so there's a lot of synergy we can take advantage of by doing both remedies, both the upland and the in-water remedy at the same time. And so I think the schedules might accommodate that, and that's what we're hoping for.
Great. Thank you so much, Dwight. So I'm not seeing further questions in the Q&A at this moment, but Douglas Larson, it looks like you have your hand raised. Do you want to go ahead and if you have a question?
Yeah, I've just got a quick question. We've got a lot of institutional memory in the room collectively. I wonder if anyone knows on the McCormick and Baxter property, is there a lien for the cost of the cleanup on that property? Does anyone know anything about that?
I mean, Dan probably knows better than me, but I think it's considered an orphan site, so while DEQ doesn't own the property, I'm assuming there might be a lien. I just don't know.
I was just curious who paid for the cleanup.
Yeah.
Well, the state and the federal government.
Let's see.
So then it's
the public
probably
difficult
for the McCormick people to claim they still own the property.
Yeah.
Well, legally, I don't think they get to. I mean, this is something for the attorneys and the lawyers, but I think the agencies can't take the property, but they can put a lien on the property. And there would be other reasons an agency may not want to own a cleanup site either.
Yeah, okay,
Willingly.
Just curious. Thanks.
All right. Thank you,
I know the
Douglas.
Port of Portland's had interest in the site. I just don't know if they still have plans. They're trying to pursue that or not.
Yeah, I think you mean the University of Portland.
Oh, I'm sorry. The University of Portland. It's been a long day. But I understand the frustration. I mean, these are both beautiful properties, and the Willamette Cove is a special, I think, a particularly special property.
We all want what's best for it, so thanks.
Thank you. All right, so this is Lauren again. Not seeing any further questions at this time. I think we can pause, and I will go ahead and stop the recording because